Relied upon by businesses and consumers throughout the UK every day, our food sector is a vital supply chain with many moving parts and its own particular set of challenges. Expert legal advice is often required to cut through these complexities, and that's when the UK food sector turns to Freeths. A top 50 commercial law firm, Freeths' dedicated food sector team has an extraordinary track record of success, acting for manufacturers, growers, processors, distributors and retailers nationwide. Our in-depth working knowledge of the wide-ranging and ever-evolving regulations that apply to the food sector is second to none. We pride ourselves on delivering focused, pragmatic and commercial advice to help our clients achieve their aims and objectives. We have vast experience at handling high-profile cases, liaising with the media and working closely with client-appointed PR teams to prevent reputational damage. We run regular focus groups with HR professionals in the industry to address the challenges they face, and our series of national food sector webinars is a big hit with clients. More than just a leading UK law firm, you're invited to think of us as a well-informed partner committed to your ongoing success. Freeths Food, supporting your appetite for success.
Well, as I said, welcome to you all today for today's webinar, which is brought to you from our food sector group and is part of Freeths' sector week of webinars. Today we will be debating the many challenges facing the UK food industry in 2022 and beyond. As I mentioned at the outset, I am Simon Baigent. I'm a partner at Freeths and also a member of the food sector group. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Mukesh Patel, Lisa Gilligan and Tom Walker, who are also all members of the food sector group. And between us, we have a wealth of experience acting for businesses across really the whole food supply chain, from growers to retailers and really everything in the middle. We're especially privileged today to be joined by Nigel Jenney, who is the Chief Executive of the FPC. I'm sure that Nigel will be a familiar face to most of you today on the webinar, and his knowledge of and experience in the fresh produce sector is truly unrivaled. I think I speak for all of us when I say that I'm eagerly awaiting his views and those of his members on the challenges that are facing the industry at present. Just before I kick off the webinar today, I just wanted to say that there will be an opportunity to ask questions during today's webinar. Please use the Q&A function for that. We will endeavour to answer all of those questions, time permitting, but any that we don't have an opportunity to respond to, then we will follow those up with yourselves over the next couple of days. Just as a general observation from me before we start putting the questions to the panelists here today, I think there are two issues really that I think needs to be considered when we're looking at all of the issues facing the food sector. One of those is that the industry as a whole is in a unique and largely unenviable situation at the moment, in that there are many factors which cause material concern to the industry, and it just so happens that all of those are converging at the same time. I think the second point to make is that actually many growers and indeed other businesses in the supply chain are actually SMEs who are facing modest margins and increasing challenges to profitability in a marketplace where they aren't necessarily attracting financial investment from VCs and the like. So really it's against that background that I'm now going to open up the debate today to the panel. And on the first question I'm really going to put to them for a topic of conversation is really for them to comment on the continuing impact of Brexit on the food industry. Whilst it seems old news for many of us, for retailers and food producers who rely on exporting and importing products, it does remain a daily concern. Lisa, if I can perhaps pose that question to open up with yourself first.
Yes, thanks, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. I think in my experience and speaking to clients and understanding what they're going through at the moment, the changes to the system post-Brexit have arguably made this a much less efficient sector to operate in, and a much more costly one. I think adding to the cost pressures, or underneath the cost heading, we could think about and also weave into that probably the unforeseen cost implications of the meteoric rise in energy prices, which have also been have come to bear on the sector, and how that is going to be borne in the market, and whether and how that will indeed be passed on. Over the last 12 months, probably 12 to 18 months, driver shortages it's been a huge headline, and much publicised problems for the sector in terms of moving produce from A to B, whether that be inside the country or outside of it. There's been a much publicised 32 or so actions that the government have put in place to try and reduce driver shortages. But I think whether those initiatives have yet managed to trickle down is going to take it's still a huge issue, and it's a huge challenge for the industry. And as a double whammy there in terms of labour, and although the seasonal worker visa scheme has been extended to 2024, the numbers of visas available will begin to taper down from 2023. So the current position we're in terms of visas being available, we are going to retreat from that before things probably look to improve in whatever the long-term solutions are to the seasonal worker question. Looking ahead to changes that are post-Brexit in 2022, border checks on imports from food, animal and plant products had been delayed and been put on the back burner, with a staggered timetable to be introduced this year. But obviously time marches on, and those physical checks and also certification requirements begin to come into play from July of this year, with 3 distinct implementation dates: July, September and November of 2022 for differing products. And I think it would be naive or blatantly obvious to say that those checks are likely to have a negative impact during the course of the year, and a huge disruption, not least of all because at this stage we've got no idea how long those checks might take and the impact they might have on delays, whether that's products turned away, wagons turned away because we haven't got the appropriate certification, or as a result of the checks which take place. I'm currently acting for a client and dealing with Border Force quite a bit. Now, for them, the checks obviously haven't come into play, and there's a snack product which is made in Turkey. Now, the certification, they're a new entry to the market, a health product which contains collagen, and different regulations are required for those types of products. But the point of my example is they're in dealing with Border Force under the existing scheme, reviewing restoration decisions, requesting restoration in the first place. It's not an immediate process. My client began their importing back in August, and there are 4 shipments which were seized, and this is a product which can be re-exported without damaging the product and sent back to the country of origin. But with dairy, with meat, with plants, that luxury is just not going to be there. So I think that dealing with Border Force, restorations, exporting checks, re-exporting costs, etc., is challenging now. And so my concern would be just how big that challenge, or how far that challenge is going to be ramped up when those certificate requirements and physical checks come in at the 3 sort of stagger points this year. And I think from a regulatory point of view, I find it hard to put a positive spin on how that might pan out for those operating within the sector, because it's tough enough now.
Thank you, Lisa. Nigel, perhaps you can just give, maybe from the FPC's perspective, your sort of views and what your members are coming across in terms of the Brexit hangover, as it were.
Thanks, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. Look, I think challenge always brings opportunity, but it's really tough to find those opportunities as we speak at this moment in time. I think from our membership point of view, which is in essence specialist businesses that grow, pack and distribute fruit, vegetables, flowers and plants, it is tough. We offer a fantastic product at a modest cost, and it's a key ingredient to just about every food manufacturing business in the UK and the rest of the world. But the accumulation of a combination of impacts, either from Brexit or from COVID and many other actors, are all coming together to be a major, major challenge. And I think if we look at Brexit specifically, is that from a fresh produce and flour point of view, we import around 65% of our fruit and vegetable consumption and around 80% of our cut flours. So we are a very heavily dependent trading nation. We always have been. We're a very proud trading nation, but that now brings its challenges. As a product that is often of a modest value, we rely on being highly efficient and highly innovative, but the additional controls that we're now having to manage, which is quite right, that's what we have to do as a businesses, are simply beyond the ability for any business to absorb. A combination of the new regulations, the new paperwork, the new inspections, and ultimately delays in just-in-time distribution, because that's the reality of what we all face now, plus all the other challenges, is a major, major issue. I think one frightening and concerning statistic is that when you look at the number of job vacancies in the UK, which I think is around about 1.2 million, around 400,000 of those are in the broad food and drink sector. And a recent survey from our members, for example, suggests that they have an ongoing shortfall of labour requirement of around 22% of their total workforce, and in some cases 35%. So it's a huge challenge, and not having those people is also highly inefficient for those businesses as well, which just ultimately increases the cost of production. But we live in a world of a highly, highly competitive food industry and a highly competitive retail sector, but ultimately the accumulation of all these costs are simply not being able to be absorbed by the supply chain and retailers, to be fair. So ultimately, I'm afraid we as consumers are going to have to accept some level of price inflation to ensure we can continue to offer great quality food at the best possible prices.
Thank you, Nigel. And I think just sort of moving on slightly into another direction, but one probably as a webinar given by lawyers, you'd be disappointed if we didn't discuss it at all, and that is to give you some sort of comment on new regulations, new legislation coming up. And I'm just going to very briefly discuss actually the plastic packaging tax, which, as most of you on the webinar will know, will come into force on the 1st of April of this year. Not an April Fool's Day gift, I understand, but it really is another demonstration and example of where there is going to be a further cost to businesses within this sector, which again they're going to have to look to factor into running their businesses. Just as a general overview of the tax for those of us who aren't aware of it, it's basically it is the purpose behind it has been to bring in a levy which is to combat the use of single-use plastic, which I think everybody will be on board with, and also to encourage a greater reliance on recycled plastics. In its broadest terms, it will affect any plastic packaging manufactured in or imported into the UK that doesn't contain at least 30% of recycled plastic, and it will become subject to a levy. There will be as a minimum threshold of businesses who use less than 10 tonnes of it in a 12-month period, and the rate of the levy is going to be £200 per metric tonne as it stands. Plastic packaging itself has been broadly defined as being anything that is predominantly consists of plastic over 50% by weight. We clearly, from a food sector perspective, it's going to have a broad reach and will affect both retailers and the fresh produce producers who will use the packaging to seal their products, etc. And obviously, it's been for a number of years within the industry, they've been looking at alternative methods of packaging, and we've all seen that. Certainly at the moment, within Freeths in our waste and sustainability teams, we've been advising clients not just on the actual financial implications in terms of whether the tax applies, and if so, what will be the cost, but it's more those other practical implications for those businesses, again, which will all have a cost which they have to factor into their businesses. For example, carrying out an assessment to see if there is a liability. We will have to create systems to ensure compliance with the new record keeping that's going to be required, and also allocating people to be responsible for PPT compliance, training staff in the new rules, and also reviewing existing supply and customer contracts to be amended to factor in PPT into the pricing. So again, it's just further example of pressure that's going to be put on the industry in terms of actually having to comply with compliance and actually suck up the cost of doing that. Nigel, I don't know whether you've had much feedback from members on the tax that's going to be brought in, and really how they're going to be looking to sort of accommodate it within the businesses.
Thanks, Simon. I think we'll all be aware of, when we visit our favourite supermarket or supermarkets, you see a huge change in the way the industry is presenting and packing its goods to offer the most sustainable options that are currently available. And we continue to work to use less and less plastic packaging within our whole supply chain. However, I think there are some key things to understand. There is a reason why, in many respects, we use some form of packaging. It isn't about just encouraging you perhaps to buy a little bit more. It's actually there to protect and maintain the quality of the products that we all wish to buy on occasions. And at the same time, as Simon's outlined, this is about encouraging businesses to be more responsible and use plastic that has a high amount of recyclable product within it. However, most, if not all, of those products are not food grade. So I cannot use them immediately adjacent to the product I would like to sell you as consumers. So it is a real challenge. And whilst there is a mechanism for businesses to either declare their use and actually subsequently pay the appropriate fees, perhaps as an importer of, let's say, packed apples, packed citrus, whatever, I suddenly become liable for a tax, perhaps, that I've never even heard of. So it is, again, a very laudable, very responsible suggestion, but for many, many small SME businesses, which is the majority of our sector, it's yet another piece of legislation that I have to manage. It isn't simply about paying the invoice, it's about managing a whole huge amount of data to allow me to justify, or not, as the case may be, the value that I have to pay to HMRC. So it is another complexity at a very challenging time for the industry.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Tom, just sort of following on from that, we've obviously been discussing the challenges that are facing the industry in terms of the attendant cost to that. As I mentioned in my introduction, one of the challenges that businesses are facing is funding challenges, and with increasing costs and regulations. What appetite are you seeing really for outside investment in the food industry?
So I think from outside investment wise, there are some key themes going on, and some of those themes are borne out by our as a firm, our recent experience in M&A transactions and investments. We've recently acted on a decent investment from LDC in Shake and Udder milkshakes, which are sort of a premium milkshake brand. They emphasise sustainability. They've got a large dairy-free product, which is very successful and growing very quickly. Another client we have is White Rabbit Pizza Company, which you might have seen in Sainsbury's and Waitrose, etc. And they are gluten-free pizzas. So there's money available. White Rabbit is rapidly growing with outside investment, and there's money available, I think, for certain types of businesses in the food sector, and those being sort of plant-based foods, meat alternatives. Lots of deals going on that space. We have other clients that are vegan-based cafes, for example. So again, lots of expansion there. You obviously heard in the news about lab-grown meat. significant investments in that, which is really a technology investment. Sports nutrition, supplements, protein snacks, that kind of thing. So those are all ripe for investment. There is money going in, and I suppose underlying some of that may be investors' ESG credentials as well. So focusing on plant-based foods, vegan things, or working with businesses within the supply chain that have good ESG credentials would be another reason for investment. So those are some of the things we're seeing, as well as larger brands picking up struggling smaller brands. Plenty of that going on, and also larger brands divesting of non-core brands. If there's pressure on those businesses, they're selling off things that are not core to their offering. And we're also seeing some distressed transactions. So one example recently was a joint venture business that had been set up to create a vertically integrated supply chain offering to supermarkets, but due to a number of pressures, some of those that have been mentioned already, Brexit, staff shortages, and also the ways the supermarkets were operating and their supply chains, caused a lot of stress on that business, which ultimately meant that it was broken up and resulted in a distressed sale. So we're seeing both positive news in some sides of the industry, and slightly more pressure at in other parts of the industry.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom. Nigel, Tom has sort of discussed some of the, I suppose, the slightly sort of more innovative areas in terms of plant-based, etc., and where I suppose money is being invested and is an attractive area. And I think vertical farming is another one where essentially there is a substantial investment coming into that. What are you seeing in terms of actually the appetite for investment, and is it in those innovative areas of the food sector as opposed to the more traditional ones that we've obviously had for many years?
I think this is a great opportunity for our industry, actually, and I think Tom's highlighted that where businesses are struggling, third parties will come in and buy wherever possible. But more importantly to that, there is a huge interest in our broader food industry, and particularly the fresh produce and flour industry, from new innovative businesses, not just about how they may choose to grow those products, but actually how they present and deliver those goods to you and I as consumers. I think from our experience of lockdown, we have fundamentally reconsidered how we wish to live and how and where we source our food and our flours, for example. So look at all those great businesses that you may well have used, in the last few months, and there are many, many more. In terms of, I think Tom's mentioned vegans, flexitarians, and actually what I think is very interesting is actually using our base ingredients as a plant protein to offer, an alternative choice in terms of what we all choose to consume, either at home or when we're out on an evening with friends. So I actually see that as a significant growth area for our sector and a huge potential. The great thing is we are part of a sector where there is a huge interest in our industry to actually consume more of the products we grow and produce. So that is fantastic. There are other sectors of the food industry that may be wondering what to do next. I think as our sector, we have a great opportunity to drive and deliver that innovation that businesses want to achieve. And at the same time, clearly consumers now are very keen to consider and adopt.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nigel. That's useful. Mukesh, we've We've already discussed the labour challenges facing the food industry, and much has been made of the development of the agri-tech sector being a potential solution to these challenges. But in your view, how immediate is that solution, if at all?
Yeah, thanks, Simon, and good afternoon, everyone. I mean, the UK is seen as a real innovator when it comes to agri-tech, and there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in that sphere. A lot of it's driven by climate change challenges, public concern about high food mileage, and wanting to do their bit for the environment. But I think at the moment, there is a bit of a question mark in terms of scalability for some of these innovative companies, and also price point in terms of where are they able to deliver to a price that the consumer is willing to pay. There are lots of pressures that we're all aware of, that we're all facing in terms of cost of living expenses going up, and it's an area which is certainly ripe for investment. And I think we will see, as innovation grows in this sector, that scalability will become better, and I think, you know, inevitably prices will drop. But certainly, I mean, I've had a client recently in my region who has developed a product which has both farmer and food sector application, and they're a new business, and the way they're looking to scale up is to enter into a worldwide distribution agreement with a large multinational. And that's going to enable them to get those economies of scale, which will then drive prices down and enable them to grow their business. So it's an exciting area, but I think we're probably a little way off from, you know, being the answer to all the issues and pressures that the industry is facing.
Thank you, Nigel. It's an opportunity, isn't it, with the agri-tech, and I'm sure it's an exciting one with that. It must be something that's coming across your door more and more at the moment.
It absolutely is, which is why we actually launched last year an industry first agri-tech and careers event to showcase the industry in terms of the new technology that's available, but also actually encourage new entrants, you know, young people that can have great careers within our sector. But to answer the point particularly, I think this is a rapid cycle. I think we will see a fundamentally different food sector to what's here today, 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. And I think certain aspects of the industry are desperate for the technology to actually, you know, replace some of the labour, by a simple example, that we don't currently have. But it's much, much more than that. It's more than just, you know, how do I replace labour? The opportunity to manage your business in a very different way that was not even conceivable a few years ago is something fantastic. And we have, you know, many members really looking to understand the opportunities of how they can develop. But one of the tough questions is, at this moment in time, is the capital investment. It is huge for many smaller businesses and is possibly not affordable. So I think at the same time, what I would encourage, you know, the UK government to consider is not just encouraging startup businesses, encouraging the academic development of that technology, but thinking carefully about how the broader industry can effectively adopt and efficiently and cost effectively adopt that technology to maintain our position of being, you know, a fantastic international food industry.
Yeah,
thank you.
And I think, Nigel, I was just going to say that when you've got smaller businesses who are getting outside investment, the critical thing to consider there is to make sure that the terms upon which that investment is made are acceptable to the business, and that there's a sort of exit plan in terms of how that company can then, you know, move on, and at what point that will happen.
Yeah, look, I think it's always important that, you know, if you are a business owner, regardless of size, but perhaps when many of these businesses are first, second, third generation family businesses, there is a real pride and commitment to that business. But at the same time, what does the family want for that future of the business? And also they're committed and loyal employees as well. You need to have a strategy, and you need to take the appropriate advice to make sure what you hoped for does come to fruition.
Yeah, and absolutely right. I think, Tom and I have had instances where, if you haven't thought about those things in terms of how those things are going to play out, because it's fine at the beginning of the journey, but you've got to anticipate the worst as well, and then try and provide those protections in place so that hopefully you won't need to rely upon them, but you've got them in place should the worst happen and you need to protect your position.
Yeah, let's hope that document on, in the desk on your computer or whatever, you never have to read. Yeah. But if it's there, you have a strategy whenever happens, whether that's good or bad, you know what to do next.
That's right, and early planning for that kind of thing is key in having the conversations, and it may be very different for a family-owned and second or third generation business where there's history and there's people in the family who may want to keep on in that business for the long term. There may be others who are no longer involved, different branches of the family, etc. So there's a lot to think about in that kind of business, which discussions with the right professionals at the right time are really important, and that includes everything from opportunities for investment, different types of investors, opportunities for trade sales and what that might bring, and then looking forward at the personal objectives of the business owners. What do they want to do if they do exit, or do they want to carry on the business long term? And that will be very different to what is a young, effectively technology business where you're coming up with a new product or new agri-tech product or new plant-based food product which you're building rapidly for a quick sale to private equity or to a larger business, and having those early conversations to work out what's your strategy, your 3 to 5 year corporate strategy, are really key. Really interesting conversations as well.
Nigel, you've mentioned a couple of times that notwithstanding the challenges facing the industry, there are also a number of opportunities as well, and it's an exciting time in many respects in that area. Perhaps you could just put a bit of light on the against the challenges that we've been discussing, and perhaps just sort of describe for us the sort of opportunities that you're seeing for the members of the FPC and generally in the industry at the moment.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for the opportunity of giving away my trade secrets free of charge. That's much appreciated. Look, I would say this really, one from an industry point of view and perhaps from a consumer point of view, because they are similar but different, is that, look, I think, as I mentioned earlier on, is that we have all reflected about what we now feel is right for ourselves and our family. And perhaps, and we all love using our multiple retailers, however we choose to shop with them. But actually, are we in a position now that perhaps, to a modest amount, multiple retailers are beginning to lose their control and dominance, that they're the only route to market to you and I as consumers? I think that is now being challenged. I think we've talked about, or we alluded to that I think, development, re-envisaged, if you like, independent retail sector that is actually retail in a different way. It may be online retail, it may be an established route to market that we all probably know from our high street greengrocer, for example, or high street baker. But actually many of them are offering, food solutions and flour solutions in a way that were never dreamed of, many of them, perhaps before the last couple of years. But I do think, one of the key things the industry has to be aware of is that pace of change and that speed of delivery to my offer is going to get ever quicker. We as consumers are more and more demanding in terms of the price point, the provenance, but actually I want it now. And if you look at the younger generation, and my kids are now young adults, but the way they choose to shop is very differently to perhaps the way we perhaps used to. But they are using social media, for example, to select which choice of business they may buy their goods from. What is their provenance? What is their interest? And I think, that immediacy that, I've made a decision now and I want my meal or my meal ingredients to be delivered to me in probably less than an hour, or even in some major cities, depending where you live, can be delivered to you within 20 minutes. I think is a game changer for our industry. So I think it's how we as proud food and flour producers and distributors, how we engage with that new way of talking to consumers and nurturing that opportunity to trade direct with you and I as consumers. But it is tough. Consumers are hard business people to manage. We all know how we behave when the supply of something that we get is not acceptable. So I think it is quite a shock to some businesses that have never done that before, frankly, and just normally trade business to business. But I do think, without question, whilst I still think there are many, many established retail businesses that will evolve and develop and be fantastic customers for our industry in the coming months and coming years. But I do think there is an emerging group of businesses, and some of them I don't think we've seen yet, about how we will all choose to buy and even gift, for example, the food or flowers or many other things that we choose to buy. I think it's an exciting time for the industry, but I do think we need to think about what we offer, how we offer it, and at what format it actually arrives in the marketplace. I think when you look at millennials and Generation Z and everything else, they've only got 3 or 4 key criteria. It is price, it is product availability, it's speed of delivery, because if it ain't on my iPhone, I'm not buying it. And at the same time, what do we all think as consumers? So the product reviews that we've all placed for whatever product are now key parts of that decision process for young adults that ultimately will be the parents of the future. So the way they think now will go forward for the rest of their lives. So I think that's a fascinating opportunity, but I think it will make many businesses think about, have they got the right business offer today that's actually sustainable for the future?
And Nigel, that creates its own sort of unique pressures, doesn't it, in terms of the ESG pressures that all businesses are facing, and how you marry the two up, because that becomes increasingly more difficult. And I think that then leads on to looking at how can you achieve those efficiencies that will enable you to do both. So I think you're right. We're going to see more innovation and tech coming into play, so as to enable businesses to be able to fulfill both the consumers' needs, but also fulfill their environmental, social, and governance requirements.
Absolutely. I think. Sorry, Lisa.
No, not at all. After you.
I think one of the fascinating things is that when you look at what I may call, with the greatest respect, the new disruptors in the marketplace, they think very, very differently and have very different offers to what perhaps we may say, an established or traditional business. And I think, how do you marry the two, and how does each other respond? Because they both have a place in the marketplace, but at the same time, as you say, we do have to be responsible. We're all looking about not just costs and efficiencies, but what is our carbon footprint in simple terms? What is our sustainable offer to all of ourselves, as consumers? But I think, in respect of that, I do think we just need to balance as well, is that, when I said at the beginning, a large proportion of what we consume and enjoy is imported. In my view, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think we may well see perhaps increasing levels of UK production over time. But at the same time, I think we should remember is that many of those products that we import are helping to feed and develop family farms in all parts of the world, and at the same time educate and develop their children. So it's about looking at the whole, just not one part, which I think is always important to remember.
And just following up on that point, you made about younger generations, millennial people who have particular priorities when they're choosing what to buy. Those views will, as you say, continue throughout their lives, and they will, if they're not already, hold the purse strings for their pensions, which in turn, if they choose ESG or pensions are generally being invested in that way now, will really force businesses, both when they're seeking investment and when trying to sell to consumers, to focus on those things, because they won't get investment if they don't look after the supply chain in the countries that are supplying them, or if they're not using the right kind of packaging or whatever. It's just going to be an increasingly significant pressure, I think, on businesses.
If you'd like me to comment, I totally agree, and I think for a more modest-sized business, is where do I turn next? Which is my priority to resolve? Because I'm increasingly getting a much longer list, and some of these things are very, very complicated to do, and on occasions, the information necessary to do it with an appropriate detail is just not there yet. So it is going to take some time before we can do many of these things as a food industry that we all want to do, and there are various challenges for the food industry to meet at the same time. If I said sustainability perhaps may cost us all a little bit more, would we all accept that, or would we not wish to accept that? That is the debate, isn't it? I think one of the fascinating things, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I will do, is that how as a nation do we value our food? If you look at what we all spend in our own unique ways, the modest amount that many of us do spend on food these days, it's far less than our grandparents. And perhaps that's something we do need to reflect on. There are other pressures, I totally get that. But when you look for my sector in fresh produce, the average family will spend less than £5 a week buying fresh produce. That's a crying shame. Because it's not, in relative terms, it's not expensive. If you're on a modest budget, I accept it is very difficult on occasions, but it is great value. And I think, and it's great value, it tastes great, and it's healthy for you. What more can we offer?
Absolutely. Forgiving the pun, Nigel, thank you for that. Lots of food for thought. We have a couple of questions which I will just open up to the panel, if I may. The first one that is coming on the Q&A, I'm just reading this out, and perhaps then the panel can just have a response. My local Tesco driver tells me that they are no longer having a driver shortage. There are issues there are issues around staff shortages with in-store pick and pack, leading to cancelled deliveries, especially in the evenings. Are you seeing less pressure on drivers elsewhere?
You'd like me to start, Simon?
Why not?
Okay. Well, thanks, Mukesh. I appreciate the support there. I think there's two elements, really. Is that I think we have to understand, if we're talking about HGV drivers, and obviously you've got to have the appropriate qualification to drive one of those vehicles. Yes, there are considerably more people who have passed tests recently, but it is still a challenge. We certainly do need more. But I think this is about the whole flexibility of our new labour force. That business loyalty is much less than perhaps it used to be, and people are moving jobs much more readily than we've ever done before. So I think as a business, if we're not offering, it's not just about, particularly to younger people, it's not just about how much, it's about many, many more things as well, which I think we as an industry and beyond do need to think about. So yeah, I think it is tough. There are all sorts of issues, sadly, where your groceries haven't arrived for whatever reason, but that is sadly a sign of the times at the moment. But I hope it improves for your listener in the near future.
I think labour shortages are the same across many sectors at the moment. We do a lot in the licensed trade and restaurants, leisure, hospitality, and beyond. I think the impact that the pandemic has had on people in terms of what is it that I want to do, where do I want to work, and what do I expect in terms of fulfillment, from that role.
Yeah, I think one of our clients is a delivery company, and I think certainly we've seen that the pressures on them in terms of their staff and retaining and recruiting staff haven't eased, and they've got even more acute over the last 12 to 18 months, and I think it's looking to continue to be that way for some time.
Thank you. We just, I think we've got time to squeeze one more question in. This is from Ruth Dolby, Ruth's question. Is the food and drink industry still the most heavily regulated industry in the UK with the largest amount of regulation? It is certainly an industry with a low barrier for entry, mainly because everyone eats and drinks. How can we reach and then support companies to conform to the guidelines and legislation from day one? I welcome a response from anybody on the
I think as a regulatory lawyer, I think I was going to say you've got to know your industry. You've got to know the legal framework which you're, of the sector that you're just about to embark on. But bearing in mind we've talked so much today about emerging technologies, digital technologies. There was the Food Standards Agency, a big regulatory enforcer, published a report last year on emerging technologies in our sector and what, in a sort of crystal ball exercise, what they thought are going to have the biggest impact on the UK food system. Now they highlight, I think they chose 6, highlighting synthetic biology, novel food packaging, so touches upon the waste packaging ideas and how you might address those, and digital technologies. But one of my reason for mentioning it is that as a regulator, one of the points that the FSA make is that there will need to be a new regulatory framework to keep up. Because whether it's vertical farming, so how are we going to prevent contamination, how we're regulating it, increased indoor farming. So I think whatever the regulatory framework is now, it won't, huge swathes of that won't be the same in 5, 6, 7 years time, because the way the industry operates won't be the same. So I would say the short answer is probably yes, it will be, but it won't be the same regulations you're dealing with today, potentially across the board.
Shall I just comment a little? Look, totally agree with what Lisa just said. I think pragmatically, though, I'd just look at it this way. The food industry, pre and post Brexit, is already highly regulated. I think perhaps I would hope now with UK regulation that the government will continue to, or would encourage them to actually respect and support responsible businesses and actually give them some credit for doing many things that there is a plethora of regulation that perhaps is necessary in some respects, not necessary in others. But I do believe with emerging food products, we have to be responsible as well. So I think it's a bit of give and take. But at the end of the day, I would suggest good, accredited, responsible businesses are doing far, far more than what the minimum regulations require. But I do think we should be given credit for that as a food industry.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, that brings our webinar today to a conclusion. I'd like to thank our panel for their insights into the challenges and opportunities facing the food industry. And many thanks to you all for joining us. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar to you all. And so it only just now leaves me to thank you all on behalf of the panel and myself for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.